Hey everyone, this is Whitney from the Broken Token Podcast, and we're excited to bring you one of the sessions that we recorded at the 2016 Southern Fried Game Room Expo held in Atlanta. Now, this session is entitled Painting the Dots, Pinball's ColorDMD Revolution, and it's hosted by Daniel DeBusschere. Now, sitting on the panel along with Daniel is Mark Jarzewiak and Mica Critchfield. Now, both Mark and Mica are very active in the ColorDMD community today, both from a colorizing perspective as well as helping out other developers. Now, between the two of them, they've got quite an impressive list of games or titles on their resume. I'm talking about games like Tron, Metallica, The Simpsons Pinball Party, AC/DC, and Doctor Who. Now, along with that, we also have the world premiere of Color Dots running in a Family Guy. Now, this project's been under wraps for several months, but it's neat to see it come to fruition, and you'll get your first view of it here. Now, I do want to apologize up front because there is a couple of minutes, maybe 3 or 4, where I was either caught talking to someone or someone was talking to me, and I stepped away from the tripod and neglected to follow the conversation as it transitioned from the tables to the pinball machine and back to the tables. It's all good, the audio's still there. I just wanted to let you know it does catch itself back up. So again, my apologies. So with that, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to Daniel and learn a little bit more about the sweat and the equity that it takes to colorize a pinball title. So if you're ready, I'm ready. So why don't we go ahead and blow up the logo and have some fun. Thanks.
We're here to talk about coloring DMD animations on pinball machines. Here we have on our panel Mica Critchfield and Mark
Jarzewiak.
Okay, I would have totally butchered that. Sorry, Mark. Just Mark him.
Still Critchfield.
What's that?
Still Critchfield.
Well, anyway, we're here to talk about colorizing pinball. So, and these two have experience doing it. Mark's done 3 or 4 games. What games have you done, Mark?
I started out with Doctor Who a couple years ago, which when this goes back will be sitting right next to it. Back near the back of the room, so when you see that, you'll see that. And then the second one I did was the Simpsons Pinball Party. And then after the Simpsons Pinball Party, I helped out with a couple other games. Actually, during the Simpsons Pinball Party, I helped out with sprite modes on Metallica and AC/DC. And then I just finished Tron. Tron, which was a very long time coming because Randy was in the middle of making engine changes for Tron, for Iron Man, for Spider-Man. He was making a whole bunch of, he basically had to rewrite the entire ColorDMD engine so that the original hardware that came out in 2012 could handle the extended memory, could handle all of the information that needed to be in there, because as some of you may know, Tron has video clips in it, Spider-Man, some of those Stern games from around 2010 forward. Someone got the bright idea to put video clips in there and cut them down to 128 by 32 or less because they're not full width. So in a lot of cases, they're only like 80 by 32 pixelated images. So that was a kind of a big time taker. And then I've been working on this game. I started on this game a little bit before I finished Tron. And this game will be coming out sometime in the future. But I will be demonstrating some things on the game for you today.
And then Mica?
I'm not allowed to say what I'm working on, but I just need to say that one guy on Pinside who keeps asking for it, you're going to be happy. That one guy is keeping me going.
There's always one. There's always one guy, and it's not Gilligan's Island.
It is not Gilligan's Island. It is Hard Body.
I think so.
Pulled it out of me.
I think
no,
it's Raven, right?
Oh yeah, Raven. That's
Raven.
right.
And you guys mentioned Randy. Let's talk a little bit about Randy. What, your relationship with him, how you got engaged with him, how you got part of the project and all that.
It's just straightforward. We had a Doctor Who machine, and I had not much knowledge of ColorDMD, but I had seen that there had been games. And one day I just kind of went to the ColorDMD website and looked up the community page on development. And he had a thing there, and it just openly said, hey, if you are interested in coloring for ColorDMD, contact us. And at the time, one other person had colorized a game, or had done what we would call reference frame coloring for Creature from the Black Lagoon. So there was really only one person had done it, and even that person had not done the entire game and everything else. So I just emailed him because, frankly, all I wanted was a ColorDMD for Doctor Who. I'm like, hey, if I color this game, I'll get a free ColorDMD out of it. And so, and partly because the DMD was also going out, and I'm like, hey, this is perfect. And I contacted him, and he's like, do you have one? I'm like, no. And he said, okay, I'll send you one. So he sent me a development unit and an independent contract, NDA, because he has a lot of proprietary software that he's written for ColorDMD. And so that's pretty much it. I just emailed him, and I'm like, hey, I want to do this. The funny thing is he sent me the development unit. I got it started, went through the first caps, and then started looking at the process like from the very beginning. And after about a first week or so, I was like, man, this is going to be a lot of work. I can tell. I'm like, this is way more than I thought I was getting my head into, just looking through and doing a couple steps. And he sent me an email within like 2 weeks. He's like, so if you want to back out, it's okay. Don't feel bad, Just send me back my display and we're good. And I'm like, no, I'll stick with it. And it took about 8 months, and I put probably almost 200 hours into that game. But at that time, the tools were the DOTS program. When he first did Medieval Madness, which was the first game he colorized, he did that completely by numbers. I mean, he did that all spreadsheet numbers, written down on notepads, whatever. It was all done that way.
I have no idea how you guys did any of that. I had one point where I was really complaining at like 11 o'clock at night to you on Facebook about how hard something was. He's like, I need you to go back, and I need you to pull up DOTS 1.2, and I need you to try again. And about 30 minutes later, he got a very angry phone call about how impossible it was, because it really is a spreadsheet. It's an Excel sheet, and I don't know how they did anything in that. I mean, imagine trying to use an Excel spreadsheet on 128 by 32 to figure out where everything goes, moves, shifts, and colorizes. It's ridiculous.
So the program that we have now has a lot more features. He's added. I can't really talk about a lot of the features, but I mean, he's made the program so that some of the simple logistical tasks of coloring, like coloring mega blocks of things that are continuous intensity, takes less time. He's added copy and paste features and transparency features. And those things have shaved tons of time off. But the sprite editor that he finally built in, before we had a sprite editor, which we have one now in the official program that he maintains. But before that, the spreadsheet she's talking about, and I'll show you what I mean by sprites and how you determine what's a sprite and what's not a sprite. But the spreadsheet basically converted all of the sprite information into hexadecimal values that are related to the way his program software and his algorithms work. And so when I started Doctor Who, I kept asking him about the sprite mode. I'm like, come on, you got to give me this information, because I thought I was so far painted. I had painted for hours and hours. I mean, I had probably already put in 60 hours. I thought I had the game like 95% done. And the funny thing with coloring is when you're 95% done, you're like 40% done. And so that's when I got into the spreadsheet. Chris, I can't remember his name, but Chris, who's the Chris Enright, who is kind of the co-conspirator of ColorDMD. He had created a really basic Excel sheet, and I've never used Excel for much more than just like summing stuff up, creating averages, just your simple stuff. And he had it doing some crazy things, converting from decimal to hexadecimal and binary and all this different stuff. So I went in there, I figured out what he was doing, and then I modified that spreadsheet for my needs for Doctor Who, because back then, and I really wish I could show you the sprite editor, because back then what you had to do was literally, Chris would take a sheet of graph paper, because I've seen scans of the way he did it, and he would literally write out all the intensities for every sprite and every single pixel, and then he would go through and he would manually put them into this program. I talked Randy into putting export frames in there, and then we could take that information and then start doing some modification. But back then, you used like 3 programs to do what you use 1 to do now. That was only 2 years ago.
I've noticed on some of the Pinside threads, people think it's easy to do this, right? I've seen you have arguments with people that have no experience at all doing this. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Family Guy's here. I went to your house to kind of deliver the game so you could work on the animation. You know, I wanted Family Guy colorized, and the only way it was going to happen if somebody that could colorize had a Family Guy. So you've had it since, what, October?
Something like that, yeah. You brought it late last fall.
It's going to be like a new game to me. Anyway.
It will be. And my high scores I put up on there are gone too.
Well, I'll clear those out. I got that.
That's okay.
But my point is, I did not realize at the time how crazy it was, some of the things that you had to do to make it. It's not as simple as writing new dots for the thing, right? You can't change the code that's coming out of the program. You have to take the code that's coming from the program and do something with it. I had no idea there were spreadsheets behind it, but for those people that think it's easy,
we've improved dots just a little bit beyond the spreadsheet phase.
For those people that think it's easy, help them understand why it takes hundreds of hours to colorize one of these things. What's the process?
Well, I'll make a quick comparison to start out, because I know that some people have been using SmartDMD, which uses a pinball browser written by Olivier in France. And it's a really pretty cool program. And I think that's where some of the sort of discussion of, oh, this is easy to do, came from originally, because people were like, well, man, I can do a game, because one of the guys down, I think Mike down in Florida did Metallica, and he did it in a relatively short period of time. But what he was doing was coloring the original images on the ROM themselves before they are run through the processor, before they're run through the transitions, all of the software that the game itself has. So when you watch a game and you're watching the DMD animations, the way animations work is that they're set up in layers and they have priority stack. So if I'm playing a game, if I'm playing Family Guy and I hit the beer can, if I hit the beer can enough to qualify one of the beer can awards, then Brian's going to shuffle across the screen. And it doesn't matter what else is on the screen at that point. Brian's sprite takes priority in the game program. That's something you have to deal with after the fact. There are random events that come up. Some of the sequences, like right now it's going through a track sequence. These are all what I would call static sequences, because they're all set. So those frames, they're going to happen a certain way. Now, something that changes is in the middle of this track screen, if you'll notice. So if you notice when I go backwards, you see how there's a little transition from one screen to the other? And if I come over this way, let's go forward, because I had to go through just a few days ago to fix this. Actually, Thursday morning, or yesterday morning before I came up here. Let me start one out. So I've got a signal ROM on here, so right now this just looks like a yellow version of what you would normally see. So a random event, I'm going to start TV mode and show you a random event. So I want to start Sexy Party mode. So Sexy Party is a perfect mode to show you when you need sprites.
Sexy parties are not just for adults anymore.
Alright, so with Sexy Party, whenever you hit one of the jackpot shots, which is the lowest shot to the right of the Chris shot, or the ramp shot, come on now.
Yeah, there's your guess.
He comes out, and the thing is, if you'll notice the dancers behind him, every time the number of them changes. Now, the first time you walk through this, you might think, okay, that's cool, the number of those things change. Cut the volume down here. So, every time that happens, there's going to be a different number of them come. Now, right now, it looks like, okay, you just color that sequence and then you're done. And you might have 20 or 30 sequences. But the problem is, when you really look at it and... Did I get one more in there? If you look at it, the ladies don't come out in the same order. The game randomly assigns one of a series of sprites, which maintains itself across the screen. Maintains itself as an animation across the screen, but they can randomly pop up. So you can't just paint. There could be an unlimited amount of ways that could show up. And that's that opto that's out. That's causing that to multiply hit.
You broke the opto?
No, I did not break the opto. I like that when I got it. I just realized what it was. Although I've never stood on this side of the machine and noticed that those say fart. That's weird. So that's an example of a sprite, a situation that you have to have sprites, because you don't know what color they're going to come out. Now, what I could do is I could identify each one of those ladies as she's walking across the screen and just say, okay, well, at this intensity, we'll just color all of them the same. But then that needs it to be bland. Now, I'll show you that mode colored in a little bit, and you'll see what it means to be able to identify them individually. That's an example of a sprite mode. Another example of a sprite mode, there are several in this game. So I said, when he comes across the screen, I want you to watch the screen because I'm going to show you a problem area. And I didn't mean Peter's fat, you know what. Okay, now see how he comes across the screen? Whatever's on the other side of the screen, it might be there, it might be something different. So you don't know what's going to come in front of him. And dealing with a situation like that, is where you often run into a lot of your issues, like figuring out whether you have to use a sprite mode or handling the sprite mode. The really difficult part of dealing with the sprites sometimes is that if you get into a mode and you have to have limited sets of sprites in your modes because you can only have so many sprites in a mode before the engine can't handle it. If you get into a mode, you have to have ways to get out. So sometimes, excuse me, I heard someone the other day saying, talking about a game that they were playing and it got locked in a white screen. And I said, oh, it sounds like, I think it was Tommy. And he said, oh, it sounds like you got locked in a sprite mode because he said it went into this one thing and everything was colored and then it went black and white and it didn't get out of that until I power cycled the game. And what happened there is that the game didn't catch a frame tag that said, hey, get out of this mode, go back to normal coloring, and go back to looking for other modes. Because what happens is that when that sexy party mode starts and it senses that first frame where Stewie comes in from the right, it automatically goes into a mode that says we're going to be in this mode. And it's got a limited set of things, and I have to put in fail-safe tags to make sure that no matter what happens, if it's tilted, if someone opens the coin door, if some other animation that I've never seen before comes up, that it has to be able to get out of that mode without someone opening the coin door or power cycling the game, because that would really ruin the experience. Sorry, I'm a little wordy.
How about you, Mica? Your experiences doing the colorization?
It really is. It sounds so easy. It's like, oh, we're gonna color some dots. How hard can that be, right? And
intensities on the dots. You got colors on all the dots.
I got my developer kit and I took my captures and I colored what I thought was so much of the game and it felt awesome. And then I put that first ROM Randy made me into the game, and I realized so much of it was still black and white. Because if you're actually manually coloring the screens, you're still not grabbing transitions. So anytime the screen wipes, it's now back to black and white. Anytime that you've missed a sprite mode, it's now back to black and white. And it shifts constantly. And it's really kind of this great mixed emotions moment where you're like, wow, this looks so great. I gotta finish this. And then you're like, wow,
about 2%
this is so
done.
Blank. I've been doing this for hours and there's nothing to show for it.
And that sometimes you will work for hours, you'll save all these files, you'll save all these changes, and you realize it doesn't work. You put it in the game and you're like, I have to go back and change that entire color.
Because you're really colorizing the individual pixels in some cases, right?
And they look different in the computer versus the DMD. So you go put it in the DMD, you're like, wow, that looks awful. That is the worst color choice I could have possibly made. Who thought that was a good idea? Right. And then rip it back out, do the 200 hours over again.
It's funny because he said the exact same thing.
It really is, though, because it was one of those moments where I was like, wow, Randy was like, so how you doing? I was like, I have done so much tonight. I have colored everything. It looks great. And he pulled up the ROM. He's like, no, you have not.
Well, and Randy's I will say this about Randy. He has a very specific vision for ColorDMD and a very specific vision for the quality. He really wants every product that comes out with a ColorDMD name to have the highest of quality. He wants it to meet his standards. And so when you get to that point where you're beta testing and you've got a couple of people out in the field testing, I actually have the best person testing this game I could possibly have. I've got the director of Family Guy beta testing it right now. So when I get feedback from him, he's like, Quagmire's shirt needs to be this color. Lois's shirt needs to be a different green. It's a little too lime. Can we make it a little more turquoise? Peter's pants need to be green. When he got a hold of the ROM, he's like, it looks great, except for here's a punch list. And it's very clear that he has been directing this show for 12 years because he recognized everything. He sent me a punch list couple pages long within about 30 minutes of getting the ROM. It was one of the most specific punch lists, which was nice because then I could just go back in and 15 minutes later I gave him a back ROM. He's like, wow, that was quick. I'm like, hey, give me a job. I didn't say that, but I'm holding that for later.
But Randy is very, very specific, and he wants everything to match the cabinet. It all needs to match the art that's already existing in the game. And the best backhanded compliment I got was I did like one of the title screen logos, and he was like, wow. I looked at that and I thought it was hideous. And then I looked at the game and then I realized you were actually kind of spot on. It's like, oh, thanks, Randy.
It's true. The color guides, the game, how I set up the palettes for Family Guy was I literally just found an on-screen scan of the back box and used that to grab all the color RGB values from. Some of them turned out to be a little toned down. There's a lot of, and that's the other thing, there's a lot of research that goes into doing some of these titles. When I did The Simpsons, we started watching The Simpsons at home, like just going season through season, and I watched the first 5 or 6, 7 seasons over and over and over again because I had to go back and reference that material to make sure I was coloring that scene right or coloring this or that right. So, for example, when you see the match scene on Family Guy, you're going to think that the trash can stands out, and you're like, what are the colors for those? If you look at the scene where that comes from, from what episode that scene comes from, where he farts out a bubblegum bubble, I pulled the colors right from that scene. So there's a lot of research. There's a lot of watching the segments. Tron was, that was like, I must have watched the movie like 10 times just over the course of about a month because I had to find all those video sequences. Then you have to capture them all, resize them. That was a whole process. But that was another thing that he added to the program. He added this entire whole nother section to import video. You still have to do a whole lot of problem solving with it, but the tools are there.
That's it's both the advantage and the disadvantage of having a themed game, though, like an actual, what's the word I'm looking for, non-original theme.
Licensed.
Yeah, thank you, licensed, there's the word. That you actually can go back and reference it with an original theme. I think I probably have 200 pictures in a folder on my computer that has every square inch of that game in the closest detail, and then pictures of other people's that haven't been quite so faded, that actually have the appropriate colors as opposed to slightly washed out versions.
And you mentioned transitions are a difficulty. I'm going to say, I will say that the game that she is working on is a different manufacturer than this game.
There's your hint.
There's your one hint. It's an earlier game, and it is taking something.
Theme.
It is taking something from B&W and making it color. Does that work? But the transitions in Stern are different than the transitions for Bally Williams. They're different than the transitions Sega used. They're different than the transitions Capcom used. They're different than the transitions Gottlieb used. Some of them use similar transitions, but you'll notice, like those of you who play a lot of games, you notice a lot of recycled pieces. So if you're playing, I'm thinking of Medusa, you'll hear sounds from Centaur because Bally reused sounds. They do the same thing with DMD displays, and if you think back to the 90s, was it the 90s when we had the video toasters? And everybody was making videos with the swipes and the wipers, and everybody was like, ooh, let's use this effect because we can.
Yeah, they clearly took that to Bally Williams, and I hate whoever
Bally
did that.
Williams uses a lot of transitions like that go cross-screen, dither, and here's the reason that becomes such a difficulty. You have 128 by 32 pixels on your screen. And the way that you identify what's coming up on the screen is you select some portion or 2 portions. You can select up to 2 rectangles to include or exclude or a combination thereof. And you have to identify what's going to be in that portion of the screen. And then that's given basically some kind of a tag using his algorithms and his genius, because he really is incredibly quick and
smart.
Yeah. And so you have to use a limited number of masks to be able to identify what's going on. And that's the other thing. If you get into a game like, that's something I'm not as good at, I guess, other developers at, is I use almost every mask in a game. And I've had other developers, I only use 10 masks. I'm like, how did you get away with 10 masks? I had to use 33.
So let's talk about the process. You got the game, you put it into display. Then what do? How do you start?
You load it in developer mode. So you actually have to put in a specific developer ROM that allows you to...
Talk to the mic.
Which is in here.
Okay, Dan. Okay. You actually have to put the thing in developer mode so you can actually capture the footage from the software. You actually, stick a USB stick in there, press a button and it'll suck in all of the animation.
You're playing the game.
Basically, I sit there with
Or-
the glass off and smack.
You're playing a
everything.
recording of the game,
Yeah.
essentially. You record segments.
And
sequences.
you load that recording back into dots and start slowly working through it.
A dot at a time, or
Yeah,
in
you
the
can-
case of the mask thing that you were just talking about, that's taking a region and colorizing it a certain color.
Some of them are simple. So the basic score screen, when you start a game, the basic score screen, it depends on how you want to style that game. But for Family Guy, it's just yellow on the bottom, white on top. And there are simple design rules that you have to apply to this. Sometimes it's less is more. I mean, you do apply your standard design philosophy to colorizing because it's real easy to take sequences where you have artistic license and go crazy and think, ooh, I'm going to put this out, as people like to call it, puke of Skittles. Is that?
Clown vomit.
Clown vomit.
Yeah.
And you hear that sometimes, when people are like, oh, that looks like clown vomit. And you're like, that wasn't what I was going for. So you might have to tone down. But yeah, I mean, on a normal screen, on a score screen, it's just the top of it's white and the bottom 6 rows are yellow. And then there may be other screens where half of it's a color.
So those are masks. You're taking that region.
Yeah.
You don't individually color those dots.
Yeah.
You just say, okay, if you see this
If you
combination
see
of
this-
dots.
If you see this mask, if you see that in this part of the screen, this is what's happening, and that's the other thing, it has to be a unique identifier, then paint it like this.
Okay. Now let's talk about some specifics for this game. I know one of the things that we're going to do here in this session is you're going to actually turn on the colorization on the
As soon
game.
as I can find
Do
a
it.
I'm
ROM.
not sure how long that takes to happen, so
How long?
Takes 30, 40 seconds, depends
40
on the ROM,
seconds, okay.
if I can find it.
Yes, the gentleman in the back.
So you guys have to go through and hit every single screen.
And every single one. So if the screen only comes,
Every permutation of what could be a screen.
every variation that could possibly come up in every mode and every feature at any time.
You think about the video modes, frames per second, right? Each one of them is a frame. They colorize, well, individually or no? There's some tools to make it less individual
Some of them.
2,000 to 4,000 frames is the average.
for a video mode or video
Some of those
sequence.
frames may have hundreds of pixels colored.
Well, I mean, then there's games that have, midnight madnesses, midnight multi-balls that you've got to, change the clock in the game, hope you hit it, hope it comes up, hope you hit everything while you're in that, change the clock back, start again, try again, do that, hit that. Did you lose the ROM?
The keys to the back box.
It's like, this is going to be kind of embarrassing if you lost the ROM.
No, I've got my computer here. I could always download it.
So there's a good possibility you guys miss a frame or 2 or 10.
Oh,
Yes.
all the time.
Yes, but the thing is, you have people extensively beta test, you go through.
And they're not afraid to tell you, hey, there's a big white screen where you screwed up.
Right, but when they beta test, do they also have a way to capture those frames?
Some of the people do because sometimes the beta testers are your other colleagues that are coloring, and they might have the games. Eric Crippy, that's done Iron Man, and he's done so many already, and Spider-Man and Spider-Man VE, which were just announced. He's done tons. He's done tons. I will tell you that if you see something that's not colored here, that you shouldn't see it. I need to check. But here, let me just make a quick example of this. Like right here, this little contest winner screen. Before, when I first sent out the first or second beta ROM build to Greg, he sent back a thing saying, hey, the contest winner screen is blank. I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't even seen that screen. And there was one point where I was capping something, I got done capping, and I put in a Sigma ROM, and I was looking, and there was a thing that says Stern Family Guy Presents, and it says Family Guy across the screen in big letters. I had never seen that. And it only came out when I got to some setting in the ROM. So there are also those things. And a lot of people don't color the service menus. I'm a little bit anal. I kind of like those. I like the service menus to be colored all the way through. So, I don't know. Other people might.
You got
Not to slight anybody, but, if you're going to color it. So you can see here, the top part of the screen is all going to be white. The bottom part's all going to be yellow. Within our death shot. This is actually a sprite mode, and I can't remember why I made it sprite mode. At one point, well, actually, I can't remember, and I'll tell you why. Every time you hit death, so I'm going to let death go. So when you raise def and you hit it up here, it pulls up a little def bumper shock to keep you from dying if you go down the center. But when you hit def, this little animation plays, and you'll notice that there's a score over to the right.
Mark, your body's in the way.
Of you.
Well, you. Yeah.
You'll notice that there was a score there, and that score changed. What I didn't know early on was, how much can that score possibly change? Is that score going to go to 1 million? Is that score going to stretch into death? Because if he does, then that's going to make death miscolored. So I just made that a sprite mode so that death always gets colored, and anything else that gets come up as a score will still be colored white like it should be. I told you I would show you Sexy Party, so I'll show you that just to show you that mode. So like here's the screen. That screen always comes up and it looks for the TV, or it looks for Lois, because there's one that has the TV over here and then there's one that doesn't have Lois over here. So I had to check for both sides. So I start, let's see, I want to be on Good Old Boys. Oh, and here's another thing. Did you guys see the beer can hit? What does it say?
Root beer.
It says a root beer, because this is on family-friendly settings. Which also
And there's
means
3
that when
settings,
start-
right? There's like a family-friendly, there's a full, horribly raunchy, and then
Yes,
a
and when
medium.
you start fart multi-ball, on the family settings, it just says multi-ball, and that screen came up uncolored when I switched to family settings. When you switch to the non-family settings, this doesn't say root beer, it just says ale. And so I had to have a whole different set of sprites to capture those cans, because that image, even though it looks the same, is not the same. And the another funny thing is you find bugs that the developers didn't know about. There's a bug in that can sprite when you hit it. There's a bug when it first leans back. You can't see it at this speed, but the letters, they show the frame behind it, and they shouldn't. And I happen to know that Eric contacted Stern about some issues they had in some Spider-Man programming to correct some things, because they're just things that you see that you'll never see. People thought that there was a bug in Doctor Who, because when you go from, I think it's Doctor 2 and 5 and 3 and 6, there are 2 sets of doctors. If you watch Doctor Who when you're playing the video mode, it'll start as one doctor, and it will transition to another doctor. And it's always, there are 2 pairs of doctors that always transition the same. And people are like, dude, that's a bug, you miscolored it. I'm like, no, it's not a bug on my part. Bolly Williams misprogrammed that, either misprogrammed it back in the day, or that was someone's joke. It maybe was an Easter egg, because those doctors always change. Now, luckily, they changed in that order because that was a humongous sprite mode, and that was all done in the spreadsheets. Those doctors had to be done one for every one of those positions. So you know how the doctors are jumping and they have all these positions? I'd have a sprite for every doctor, and then I had to have multiple sprite clones for the different positions because they could be covered up with the debris. So let's show you Sexy Party. And this scene comes up, it's the same. Chicken fight! Oh, I let it finish it. Chicken fight's good too. So, chicken fight, it's not in sprite mode though, but it kind of looks like it could be. But chicken fight, this is a good example of an animation where, like you were talking about, every one of these is individually colored.
You just brute forced it?
Every one of these frames there are probably about 100, 120 versions of this frame. I just went through and spent about 3 hours coloring this one. So yeah, that was a lot of work, because that you can't go through. Let's just hurry up and beat the chicken. There you go, Peter wins. And there's Brian. Happy hour started yet. Let's light the TV and let's start the right mode this time. Okay. TV mode.
And as horrible as it sounds to spend like 3 hours colorizing one scene, I know there's one where I have 263 frames in one like 1 second animation that I had to like manually hand color. It's so much easier than programming a sprite mode sometimes, because then you're wasting a valuable sprite mode that you can't use anymore for something else. So sometimes it is worth the time.
Came up blue. I've already used one player. First one came up blue. Then you have a gray and a blue one. And then you've got a white, a gray, and a red one. Then you got a red, white, gray, blue. And the sad thing was there were actually 5 intensities on this one. I wanted to do all 5 so I could have 5 colors. In the original sequence for this, there are 8 dancing women. If you watch the show. And they're only in the sequence for like 5 seconds. I mean, they come out, they dance in a circle around, he's in a little sailor outfit. And then some of the other sprite mode, so that's that. One other sprite mode, well, there are several in there, but I'll leave it at that. And we'll let this game close and just let it sit and track for a little bit. Now, if anybody knows Family Guy and wants me to show them anything in particular, feel free.
I mean, you think about it, you're colorizing things that players like me would never in a million years see, right?
Most people, I think, don't even notice stuff until it's been colorized. There are things in Doctor Who, Tron, Simpsons, I never noticed until I colored them. And then I was like, and for a game like Doctor Who...
Those little things at the bottom of Tron. So anybody that's played Tron,
the
when
bars.
you're in there's different bars at the bottom of the screen that I had no idea until I was sitting in Brian's
So audience
office.
participation, raise your hand if you've ever wondered why Stern put those bars in there. Okay. They all have a purpose. I can't remember them in order, but they're
Cora
timers.
And Jim.
There's a Cora, a Jim, Light Cycle. There are 6 different mode timers, but 3 of them are the spinner timers. So you've got the pops, the playfield multiplier, etc. It wasn't until
I had literally just borrowed a Tron for like 6 months. I had a Tron in my house for 6 months, never noticed it. Went to play yours on the stream, had no idea it was there.
It was a blast having you there for the stream.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
And that reminds me, you asked about you mentioned about redoing something. That was when I first was coloring Tron. I saw those bars, and when I actually figured out what they were for, my initial thought was, let's color those and color them with the mode colors. But that turned into a problem because of highlights, sprites, and all these other things that were going on, the video, and it was just going to be like too much to implement. But when we put out a preview and people were like, why aren't those colored? It's like you do all this work and you make all these choices, and then there are still going to be people who want in that game what they want it to be. It took probably 10 or 12 hours to go back through all of the captures, all of the frames, all the sequences, and make sure that as I changed the highlights so that they would work. And then you have to rewrite that into all your sprite modes too. Because if you have a sprite mode that comes up, it's got to cover whatever's on the screen too, whether it's scoring, dots, so.
The other thing that's super tricky is you have a really, I guess not anymore, but you have a limited color palette on every frame. You can only use, 16?
16 colors.
Per frame. So if one of your other palettes has a color you needed, and you realize that there's not room in your other palette, you've got to reshift everything that uses palette 1 to make sure those 16 colors still match everything. So you change one color and it changes every dot that is using that color on palette 1. So you either need to move to the next palette, you need to adjust your expectations, and it gets tough if you have a really colorful game. I don't know if you ran into it this one. I know I'm struggling a little bit with colors. Thankfully we now have 7 dots?
We have 8. 7 or 8, maybe it's 7. We have a lot more. I mean, when I started with Doctor Who, we had 12 colors per frame, and he jacked it up to 16, and that was like, oh!
It was 4 palettes when I started, and then they put out new ones, and I was like, this is the greatest day ever.
Yeah, I think I used 3 palettes on this one, and one of them I only used for the sequence where they do the drunken clam, and that's because Greg said, by the way, Peter's skin needs to be slightly less tan than Quagmire's and whoever the other guy is that's in there. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I just did that, and I hope that he likes it. But, I mean, those are kinds of the attention to detail. I had something else that what you said made me think about, but I lost it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about team dynamic. You said you've done parts of games. How does that work out? Why you for that piece of it?
Okay, well, at the time, that was back when the sprite editor was still not going. So when AC/DC and Metallica were being developed, Chris Enright did both of those, actually. And Chris was the sprite guru already. I mean, he was the guy who created the Excel spreadsheet that I then modified, but I did things to Excel. I taught myself things in Excel that I was like, wow, I can do this now. And my spreadsheet, to me, became like even much more useful because I just said, okay, what do I need this to do and what do I need it to come out like? So his spreadsheet basically would take the frame information. You would have to manually enter in everything, and it would spit out whatever you needed for the program. My spreadsheet made it where you could go back in and re-edit those numbers and change it and modify it and paste new stuff in just to speed up the process. But at the time that Metallica and AC/DC were in development, there was no generic sprite editor. There was nothing in dots. It was all being done. And the thing was, I mean, Chris was trying to get Metallica done within a certain time frame. And there definitely was, I feel, and this is just my opinion, I feel like there definitely was some competitive urge to get Metallica done, because at that point SmartDMD was kind of pushing, saying, hey, we're going to have this done. And I think that, you know, the coloring job Mike did looks fine. I think that the coloring job that Chris and I did, mostly, I mean, Chris, I just did a few sprite modes for that one, looks better. But I mean, it's all a matter of taste. On AC/DC, he was just so bogged down with so many other things, because those of you who have played more modern Stern games, you will know that they have thrown in so much more of their ROM is packed. If you were to open a ROM from a later era game in the last 3 or 4 years in Pinball browser and compare what's in the DMD animation section to 5 or 6 years ago, the ROMs have exploded in the number of transitions they're using, the animations, everything. They put so much more in there. AC/DC I spent a lot of time on AC/DC. How many of you are familiar with AC/DC at all? Okay, the Shook Me Up, where the car is shaking and the women are getting out of the car. It looks a little bit like Sexy Party. It is a nightmare. It was a nightmare because I had all the different women with the different intensities and different color to color all the different outfits and skin tones, because we wanted different skin tones too. But we couldn't do that because of limitations of intensity. And we are still locked down on some things, but there are so many occlusions in that mode. What's the guy that pops out of the car? I can never remember the band members' names, but Angus. When Angus pops out of the car, he covers up whatever girls are coming out of the car, and there are literally 2 or 3 pixels on the screen that tell you what that image is at that point.
So you detect the pixels and then decide what to draw the rest of it.
Yeah, but you have to make sure that those pixels cannot possibly be mistaken for some other sprite. And when you only have 2 or 3 pixels to work off of, it depends on location, it depends on where the pixels are. Some of it is saying, okay, I have 2 possibilities here. I'm going to program both possibilities, but I'm going to put a hierarchy of, if it happens before Angus, it shows up on top of Angus. If it happens after Angus in the list, so like when you're building the sprites, there's so much planning. I mean, she's talking about color palettes. One of the first pieces of advice that I give someone that's like, hey, I'm getting started, what do I do? It's like, look through all of the caps that you have first. And try not to color. Try to just pick your palette, and try not to make a very big database to start out with. Because if you do, you're going to spend hours and hours, and you might have to go back and just start all over again.
And that really helps. You told me that, and I went through and I grabbed all of the major scenes from a couple points in the game and just colored one frame in each one just to figure out what I needed, what I could reuse, what I could keep. And I literally had a sheet of paper where I literally drew out the palettes and wrote down where I was using each color in which sequence. And it turned into like a 5-page document of... It was pretty pathetic, but
it's planning
really
and it's problem solving. It's planning and it's problem solving. There's a lot of planning, writing down, taking index, like a table of contents, saying, okay, I have a cap file on this frame. Here's this animation. Here's this animation with The Simpsons. I had an indexed thing, so if someone said, hey, there's a problem with this, I just pulled up my spreadsheet and said what cap and what frame number, and I could go right to it. That saved me a ton of time. I didn't do that with Tron because it started out differently, and I haven't done it with Family Guy because every game has a completely different process. If there were 2 words to describe ColorDMD, colorizing, above all others, to me it still comes down to problem solving. Always solving problems. The Shook Me Up mode with the ladies coming out, they cover each other. So if she's one woman coming out of the car, like put your hand out this way. So she's coming out, I might be trailing her like this, with one hand occluding her and one hand trailing back. That was a problem, and we couldn't figure it out. And finally, the solution was, because one side would always be covering and the other side wouldn't be, I split every one of them into 2 sprites, a left and a half side. So all of the left sides were put earlier, so they had a lower priority or a higher priority, and all of the other halves were put later, so they are put earlier in the file, so they had a lower or later in the file, so they have a lower priority. So there's a lot of like you can prioritize and you can solve problems that way. But that was like, okay, instead of coloring them all at once, we have to color them by half.
There's a lot of trial and error and a lot of redoing of things once you realize that you found the error and need to find a new trial.
All right, so Randy from ColorDMD has come up with some new modes for displaying the various dots and so forth on the screen. Does that change the process by which you're going to colorize, like the high-res mode, the big dots mode, or any of that? Does that change what you guys do?
Does that change it for you?
I actually do. I go through, I tend to stay on the dots XL because I can see it better. They're brighter for some reason on my computer, so I see the colors a little bit better and they're a little more accurate to what they're going to be on the DMD. But I do actually go through scan, I go through high res, and if there's anything that looks really bizarre, I have to go back, change it, tweak it, move some colors around. Dots XL will generally tell me where I need to put things, but even then it's not a perfect science. There's always one tiny pixel somewhere that looks horrible in scan, that doesn't belong there, that I have to go back and find a way to mediate the issues between it. I know I probably, on every sequence, run through every mode and play it back just to make sure it looks decent every time.
And sometimes that also becomes a case of perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah, and there's some that will never be perfect, but there's some that look a lot better because of it.
I still develop every game just in normal dots because to me, I'm working with the source material, so I'm just doing that. I will say that when I had a little bit of a selfish moment when I found out that Randy was going to do the high res in the scan. It was while I was working on Simpsons, and I was begging him to let me release Simpsons as the first ROM because I'm like, this is perfect. It's a cartoon. It's going to fit the way it looks because it fleshes things in. And when I first saw it in game, it was just like, it blew me away. I couldn't believe how much different it made the dots look.
I think it's probably just purely kind of selfish on my part that all of my games run in scan, or they always run in that. I love that. I think it looks great. So I make sure that the one I'm doing looks great in scan because that's what it's going to sit on in my house. That's what it's going to sit on hopefully in everybody's house. So if it looks really crummy, I'm going to be upset.
I do look through a few sequences from time to time, especially things like Chicken Fight. I do want to see how they're going to look. But I still program in dots just in case. Because you want to know that it's going to look good for the original setting. The one thing about the high res and the scan modes is that they use algorithms to determine which dots connect based on intensity and color, and sometimes the algorithm doesn't have the best outcome. I mean, but it's probably one of the best algorithms that's out there. So
good.
I think it's a great algorithm. I prefer scan for most of the stuff once I put it in the game, and although I don't think we have all those modes available in the test ROM.
Okay. Well, I think we've got a couple more minutes, I believe, before we have to end the session. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience on ColorDMD?
Getting back to Easter eggs, so everything is beta tested in that regard. There's no way of pulling up code in the ROM to see all of the hidden things.
I actually have cheated and used the website that has all the Easter eggs in the game and found the list and went through and made sure I found it all in the caps and pulled everything I could find. Because there were some that I never would have known about unless I had that list. Because like there are some random ones that you randomly hit different left and right
sequences.
things and it pops up stuff.
I haven't gone to that extent. But I will tell you that you find what you think are Easter eggs because there are just sequences. I'm trying to remember what it is. It's not video mode. There's a sequence in Doctor Who. And I think I can't remember if it's a video mode sequence or what, but it's a sequence I have never seen. I think most people will never see it in Doctor Who because you have to do this one thing over and over so many times. And I wish I could remember what it was, but it just... Maybe. But there's a sequence there where there's something that comes on the screen, a Dalek comes on the screen and does something that I've never seen, like takes off like a rocket or something like that. And I've never seen anyone get to it in a tutorial video. I've never seen it in a standard gameplay. I don't think anybody's going to get to it, but yeah.
Okay.
At the Texas Pinball Festival, they showed on Circus Voltaire LED version of ColorDMD. Have you guys worked on any of those? Or I'm assuming he's run the software.
That's still
software
my understanding is that that's still a prototype. They're still working on tweaking that and getting it right where they want it. I mean, Randy is so specific about how he wants things that he's not going to have that out until he thinks it is producing the best possible results with the technology that he's got.
In that example, I was chatting with him about it, and he was telling me about the things he wasn't happy with, and I'm like, I can't even see it. Sorry. Any person that has this game wants this now.
And many people can't. I imagine that Chris or he will probably color it, or they've already been working on coloring it. It's just that's one of those limitations. However, that will open up some other games. I mean, someone asked about Rocky and Bullwinkle. Well, there was some interest in coloring that, but those of you who have ever seen the back box of that game know that there's some mechs way down low that you literally, I mean, you can't just remove light bulbs there. You've got a mech that's in the way. So some of the games just have other technical feats to overcome. Tommy, you have to cut out part of the back box, which I tested Tommy on ours at home, and I had to make adjustments to the back box to do that.
I think, John, you had a question.
Well, I was going to ask about, you guys know the difference. I think I heard there's a new version of the hardware and an older version.
The newer versions have a higher memory chip in them. You can replace the memory chip, I believe. I think I read in a thread because it has to do with Spider-Man. The Spider-Man sequences needed so much memory because there was so much video that they couldn't be, even with his best compression algorithms, he couldn't compress them down into the database in a way that the engine could hold them. So the newer ones will all work for anything that's been made before. The old ones will handle anything that's been released before, and I think they'll handle Spider-Man VE. They just won't handle Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man. It's not a processor difference, although, I mean, he's constantly thinking about upgrading, and he constantly talks, and we're constantly like, hey, can we put these features in? Hey, can we do this? I mean, I've thought that it would be great to have an entire game as a sprite mode. So you just detect sprites the whole game.
Okay, Satan.
Yeah, I know.
I need you to, back off for a minute here.
There are technical issues.
Sounds horrible.
Working through something like this, is it more of a developer mindset, designer mindset, or are you kind of like 50-50?
I'd say design. I think I probably spend more time with, I mean, maybe that's just the art background speaking, but I probably spend more time, half my screen is literally just pictures of the game, of trying to make it look the best and make it feel like it's part of the game and that it doesn't stick out, because there are some that I've done that just have stuck out like a sore thumb when I put them in the game, and then had to go back and really think more about colors and think more about design and how is this going to work and how does it look when this color's kind of over there but we don't really see it much. I think I probably hit design more than developer.
I wouldn't think of it as much of a developer mentality just because you're not really creating anything, you're just adapting things. So design, I would stick with design. It's about looking at your source material, it's about making choices. I will say that every time I see someone else's job, someone else's game that they've colorized, I'm like, I would have done that differently, or I would have done that differently, or, oh, that looks fantastic. Oh, I never would have thought to do that. Or, wow, that was great. Like, there are Easter eggs. In Tron, I think Eric might have been the first one. It was either Eric or Dave. Someone put an Easter egg on the display screen test. So when you go into the screen test and you do the display test and it does the line up and down and then does the full screen, there's some Easter eggs in there. And I put an Easter egg on, I think I did one on Simpsons. I'm not 100% sure, but I did do one on Tron, and I need to find that frame because I'm going to put one on here. It's just little things like that. I mean, so that's design. I mean, there's no development going on. We can't modify what's coming out completely. I will show you how I can modify. Remember earlier I showed you, because I almost forgot, the Brian sequence, how when Brian comes out, there may be stuff in front of the screen. The problem with that is that when Brian comes out, there are so many possibilities for what can be on the screen. Not a mistake. It came out of a mode. I have an emergency strike. There's my fail-safe. So there's a problem. So whatever screen I came out of, I'm going to have to go back and find that and fix it, because it got stuck in the sprite mode, and I know exactly which mode it got stuck in. got stuck in mode 8. All right, so we are going to, oh wait a minute, what am I doing? He's Ryan. All right, so it doesn't matter what's on the screen. Let's say we start happy hour. We'll start something, I don't know. Blah, 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 we're doing something here. Oh, yeah, I can do. Although Crazy Chris is never like, it never reliably goes. So when you hit Ryan, he'll come across the screen. Oh, it started in number 1, sorry. It wouldn't have done that if I hadn't started with number 1. Notice how there was nothing in front of him? I actually used an opaque color there to occlude whatever came in front of him. Because whatever's going to be is already going to have been up for several frames. I'll do it again here in a second. Is already going to have been up for enough frames generally for you to see it. But Brian came out and he created too many problems for me. Brian was not a good guy. He created problems for me. So you'll notice that when he comes out, everything in front of him just cleared out. It was the only way to address that because I would have times where he would come over to this part of the screen and there would be 3 dots and there was no way I could isolate what that was versus something else by that time. And I could have included those 3 dots, but I wanted to, you want the feel of the game to be in it, and so that anybody who's watching the display, you want them to always be in it. You don't want them to fall out because they saw a little glitch on the screen or a white flash, and you want to do whatever you can to avoid it.
Okay, we have maybe a question, one more question, because we're almost out of time.
So based on what you just said, you can only isolate sprites. You can't isolate nothing that's already black.
No. You can't put color and light where there isn't color and light being provided. Basically, as I think Randy described it as basically like light gels, or on a Leica or on a theater light. Just it's like putting cells in front of lights. So whatever cells or pixels are highlighted on the screen, those are the only ones you can color. Because we have had people say, hey, it'd be really cool if you could do this. It's like, we can't do that. If we did that, we would be infringing on the copyright by altering the actual dots. The way that Randy gets, I don't want to say gets away with it, but the way that it's legal is that because we aren't altering what's generated to the screen from the motherboard, it gets away without infringing on the software and the legalities and logistics of that.
Versus going into something like Pinball browser and actually
Versus going to the reason why SmartDMD cannot operate as a commercial entity selling those files is because you have to modify the actual ROM software that the game runs. And I know that before he started doing Stearns, Randy was already talking to Gary and whoever else at Stern to make sure that he wasn't going to have any issues with them. And I think that turned into being able to work with them with Spider-Man VE coming out so that could happen more, in a more congenial manner.
Okay, I think that concludes our session. We do appreciate you guys all joining us for Southern Fried Gamer Expo. It's been a great show so far. I really hope you enjoy the rest of the next day and a half. Thank you, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks to these two as well. I can't imagine what they go through to do this. It's just, my head was spinning when he was describing the process. I'm like, there's no way I would sign up for this.
We cried.